Tajale, warm greetings, friends. My name is Drakpa. Another quick video on what are the culture wars. What are the culture wars? So, quickly, we just activate our motivation, the lived kind of love, compassion, and wisdom, or bodhicitta. Turn that on. Thanks. So, as an aspiring Buddhist, trying to walk the path of peace, taught by the Buddha and Guru Rinpoche, peace is obviously a very central, important aspect of my life, what I put my attention to and kind of energy. And so the question of what are the culture wars is quite relevant. And here in this kind of short little time, I'm just thinking to give a really quick general orientation, like a quick hit taste of to kind of open the exploration of the culture wars, so that if you're curious to explore further, then there's a variety of kind of deep content out there to look into. So the culture wars. What are the culture wars? So really generally speaking, the culture wars are this ongoing warring between traditionalism, modern science, and postmodern multiculturalism. So we can say it's this really kind of tightly held conflict. It's a worldview conflict, a worldview war between extreme pre-modern, extreme modern, and extreme postmodern. Or you could say unhealthy pre-modern, unhealthy modern, and unhealthy postmodern. So what do I mean by this? An unhealthy traditionalism or an unhealthy pre-modern is a view that thinks its way of connecting with meaning and value, of whether you call that God or the divine or unity or goodness or truth, that its way is the only way. And the followers of that way are the true believers. They are the chosen ones of some kind. And so we have a fundamentalism related to religion or spirituality. My church is the only way. My people are the only way to follow this kind of the whole purpose of life. And usually that's followed by some kind of rationalization as to why everyone else is wrong, and thus it's okay for a lot of bad things to happen to them. So that's an unhealthy or an extreme traditionalism, an unhealthy pre-modern worldview. Then what's an unhealthy modern worldview? An unhealthy modern worldview is believing that science is the only way to accurately explain reality. That pick a type of science, it could be chemistry, biology, neurology, psychiatry, the soft sciences, psychology, sociology. That science, the methodology of science, specifically looking at the empirical data and then testing that data in some kind of a controlled experiment, and then comparing those results with other people who tested the data in a similar way, and then based on those results, getting more reliable theories of reality. So better working models, better representational systems, whether we're trying to predict things more accurately, or if there's some real world application of, literally building a bridge or shooting a rocket or making medicine that'll heal a certain kind of disease. So science in general, that's modernity, rationalism, empiricism, verification, looking under the hood. Like if there's a truth claim that says this is the only way, the modern approach will be like, why? According to who? And it'll look for further evidence, specifically according to usually very literal, empirical, rational, logical sets of evidence gathering and proof. That's modernity, and the unhealthy or the extreme version of modernity or science is called scientism. Scientism is that belief that only these literal, historical, tangible, quantifiable ways of modeling reality, that includes the full truth of reality, period. That is the final measure of truth. Quantitative only. You have to be able to show it on a graph. So that's an extreme view, and that's called scientism. And you get that even between sciences, like people that think chemistry is more foundational than biology, and that's why chemistry is the root. That's the root answer. That's the fundamental framework. That's the privileged ground narrative. Okay, so then even just saying that word narrative, that like leads us into thinking of a postmodern worldview that starts to question any kind of a response to like what is true, what is good, what is accurate, any story. It starts to situate stories within context. So postmodernity, or that worldview, postmodern worldview, emphasizes multiculturalism, plurality of perspectives, contextualization. Context matters. That facts or truths aren't just out there in a vacuum of space. There is no such thing as a God's eye view. That view is always contextualized, and there's many ways of holding context. So this is related to the story-making function of humans, the meaning-making, the value structures, all the structural, situational, processual, relational components that come together in cause and conditions to produce any kind of statement or test or product or result that we would consider a truth or reality. And that the truth of reality is much more about the context or the story making or the felt first person experience, the qualitative. So postmodernity is now emphasizing the qualitative, the lived subjective experience. So that's in groups usually called culture. And in groups, the quantitative of science is usually called society or societal infrastructure or systems theory, systems dynamics. So here where science usually focuses on the exterior quantifiable aspects of reality, postmodernity tends to focus on the interior subjective components of reality. And you can do that either with an individual experiencing reality, such as my feelings, or a group of individuals experiencing reality, like how do we make meaning together? That's called culture. And you can do that on the exterior side with science as well. The exterior quantitative aspects of interior of an individual, like the neural firing of a certain person who's in an MRI machine, for example, or you can do that collectively and come up with things like systems theory or economics, the exterior flow of currency and communication, the infrastructure, the exterior quantitative infrastructure. So you get measurements like GDP, and that's society. And so we have these three worldviews that produce very specific worlds: traditionalism, modernity, and postmodernity. And you can just sum that up as traditionalism is more related to religion or spirituality. Science is more, what the value sphere, the realm, the world-making structure of modernity, rationality. And for postmodernity, it's feelings, stories, first-person perspectives. In the extreme version of postmodernity is the only thing that matters is feelings. My truth, my lived experience, my story, my meaning making, or my group's meaning making. And so what the good part, the positive, healthy part of postmodernity, it always puts into question, or with further exploration or inquiry, like what is the context in which someone's view is happening. So it questions the privileging or the normalization of any discourse. So what is the context that a controlled experiment happened? What are the controls? Who determined the controls? Who's funding the person doing the experiment? What part or what set of the data was extracted to produce a statistical analysis or a survey? I mean, these are the contextualizations of how we filter, how we create a narrative story, how we pick and choose between a wide span of evidence or data or stimuli. How do we select for the certain part that we are going to deem more true or the truth? And so what culture wars are is you take an extreme fixation on pre-modernity, or an extreme fixation on modernity, or extreme fixation on post-modernity. So you fixate on the my religion as an exclusive, fundamental, only way this can reality can be explained or interpreted correctly. And then you go to war with all the science people or all the feeling people, the story making people. So we can just say very general kind of stereotypes. You have what is a culture wars, like religious fundamentalists come like in battle with extreme scientists or scientism, hyper, like you could say hyper rationality, only the facts matter. And then they're at war with story making feelings camp. Only the stories matter, only the feelings matter, only the context matter. And so, what we need to do to resolve or dissolve the culture wars is to see that all three of these worldviews, all three of these ways of making meaning, of making sense, they're all valuable. So, we want to integrate the healthy pre modern aspects, the healthy modern aspects, and the healthy postmodern aspects into a greater whole, because spirituality or religion is deeply meaningful in terms of ritualizing life, having regular flows and pattern making and belonging and community bonding, and initiatory practices, transformative techniques. This is all in the domain usually of religion or spirituality. And science, we need empirical tests of size, shape, velocity, predictable pattern making, statistics, just different types of factual analysis and verification. Like, we need these ways of these patterned, empirical, exterior, quantitative ways of making sense, of making meaning, of predicting, of seeing patterns. And then post-modernity, we need our feelings. We have feelings. We need these interior subjective states of awareness, that are pointed towards by like psychology or psychiatry. Like, we need to honor like the beliefs we have, the belief structures they're a part of, the cultural meaning making behind them, the different semantics, the different ways that we have a lived, embodied, felt, enmeshed experience of making meaning together in community and culture over time with rich symbolism and ritual, ritual enacted ways of playing and working and knowing. So we need to integrate all three of these: healthy pre-modern, healthy modern, and healthy postmodern. And when we start to integrate that, the culture war just dissolves, because all of a sudden it's not religion against science against multiculturalism. They all have a seat at the table. It's just we need to have the healthy or less extreme or non-extreme, non-warring versions of each of those three. And then we also need to be in a way of being that can hold the nuance and complexity of all three of those valuable worldviews into a larger meta worldview. And so that's an integrated perspective, or what happens after postmodernity. It's called postmodernity, or integral, or integrated, or systems thinking. There's different just names for it. And that's where we're honoring and interweaving these valuable aspects of each of these three worldviews into a larger worldview. And so that would dissolve the culture war instantly, because no longer is it science against religion against my personal felt experience. They all have to be honored. They all bring valuable aspects, but what we need to release is the extreme fixation, that view that only my way is right, only my method's right, only my world, the world that I experience, is the correct one. We have to loosen up and eventually stop producing that unrealistic mistaken fixation, and instead become much more integrative, flexible beings that are honoring more truth. And so once we're in this more integrated worldview, making, then all of a sudden we can participate in a greater amount of truth, of beauty, of goodness. And then the culture wars just kind of dissolve. So these are some general ballpark, kind of general orientations. So to kind of respond to the inquiry of what is the culture wars? What are they? Where do they come from? And these are very general buckets that other people have gone into much greater detail around. And just having this very simple way of holding things cognitively, conceptually, can be a good way to check, which ways am I going to war? Which ways am I being extreme? Because we can be a Buddhist, for example, and have bodhicitta as this lived aspiration, but if we're not seeing this underlying pattern making of the worldviews I'm assuming, I can still constantly be engaged in a culture war. I can say, may all beings be happy and free of causes of suffering. But every time, like, a religious fundamentalist says something that I don't agree with, I can go into a total warring mode. Or I can be severely hurt by the church and then just throw out all religion as if it's all, abuse, or it's all a totalitarian kind of power grab. Or I can, reduce everything to science and think that all these feelings are just, hormonal or hormonal movings, or, what Wilbur calls frisky dirt. I can think, well, the true answer of what is the meaning of life, what is love, is just biochemistry. Pick my empirical scientific methodology and then fundamentally reduce everything to that. So I do that reductionist move. Or I can do the postmodern extreme thing, and be, extreme relativist and say there is no such thing as truth. We're post-truth. There is no such thing as a given reality, such as, like, there's only one way of producing facts. There's many ways of producing facts, and that's true. But then it can say, well, that's why there's no spectrum of saying better or worse. There's no more true or less true. And we get this anything goes kind of openness or relativity. And if we don't reorient that in these deeper ways of integrating healthy aspects of pre-modern, modern, and postmodern, that's a system. That's a system that's actually responsive and adaptive. So it's not a new power grab, or it's not a new privileging system. It's more whole, it's more complete. It allows for more variability and more flexibility to hold more worldviews, to hold more methodologies, more ontologies, more epistemologies, and in that way it is better. But then it depends in our real lived experience with the people we're around, the environment we're in, the sense functions and faculties we have in ourselves and in others, like what metric or what way of recognizing patterns in that specific context of myself with others in a world. So self, culture, and nature. Within that specific given context, what is the relevant way of making meaning? Which patterns are going to become salient as what, why, according to what? With this integral worldview, making it so that more truth can be included, more beauty can be included, more goodness can be included, more perspectives can be honored. The valuable aspects of more perspectives can be honored. And it assumes, like, when it defines what is valuable, it's always oriented around more inclusive. And in the Buddhist context, it's a more direct, more clear and detailed, and more complete view of all the different ways that reality is functioning in terms of interdependence or cause, condition, and effect. That becomes this living thread or direction as to the spectrum of what's less true and more true, less beautiful, more beautiful, less kind and more kind. That becomes the directionality, which is always shaped by the living context that one's actively participating in. So that's it. Hopefully a few ways of just kind of very generally orienting, like, what is a cultural war? How can it potentially be dissolved? And what is the worldview we have to assume in order to see it? And then also to take active steps to not replicate that same extreme worldview warring in our own lived experience and in the infrastructure we create. How do we have that level of open-mindedness? It's all also very contextually sensitive, that honors the felt experience, that really appreciates quantifiable data and facts, that also is very attuned to deeper meaning, deeper depth, deeper kind of spirit, or potentially like transformative or transcendent ways of being and knowing and becoming. Like, how can we integrate spirituality, science, and our feelings, our first person perspectives into this greater wholes? They're all legitimate, they're all valid, they all have to be honored. And so we need to constantly re-engage a worldview that honors all those different ways of living and being in the world with others. So all love. Thanks so much, friends. I hope it's helpful. By this merit, may all obtain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy, wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. And then real quick, sorry, it just popped up. In order to have this more integrative or like multifaceted way of honoring more truth, more goodness, more beauty, we actually need to be in community with other people that can show us the syntax or the grammar, the assumed rules or patterns that we don't yet see in ourselves, in our minds, in our bodies. It's helpful to have other people, other perspectives to cue us into the different assumptions we're holding that cause us to have extreme views. So that's why community is important. That's why third person independent fact checking is important. That's why it's good to see where the budget it gets allocated to. It's why we have these other ways of holding each other accountable. The beauty of holding someone accountable is you do have to hold them. You do have to care for them. You have to value them. And that part of being with others, like being pro-social naturally, like contextual beings, is that the beauty of others, if we have a reliable trust that we've gradually and deepened over time with others and institutions, trust institutions we can trust in, friends, family, other people, colleagues, we can trust their opinion, and we create a good faith dynamic where we can help each other see the blind spots, see the implicit grammar we're assuming, the rules we're assuming, the assumptions we're holding that we don't yet see, because it's some of those are very hard, if not impossible, to see from the first person lived subjective interior experience. So we have a third person, this other, a thou, like this other honored guest that we're actually co-creatively exploring reality with, and we can be checks and balances for them. They can be checks and balances for us, because we're always individuals in collective community, and communities are always made of individuals. And as individuals, we always have this first person subjective interior felt experience. And we also have bodies. We're also embodied in infrastructure of exterior third person quantifiable elements or aspects or infrastructure, like living systems, social systems that we're a part of too. So we need to have this much more full way of being held and of holding one another, of caring, of showing up. And that's the deep, rich thread of Buddhism in general, and also just of integral worldview making. Thanks, friends. Tashule. Bye-bye.